professional learning sessions!
This is about how we can ask questions that invite kids into exploring the natural world. And if you want to be a true facilitator of wonder and curiosity, you got to know how to ask good questions. A great question or a bad question can either sink or elevate an activity that you're doing. Just even one question can do a lot of that. Let's start off with this one right here. Can you please turn and talk on the question that's up on your screen?
I think giving them permission, like verbally saying, go look for that, or find something you have a question about.
I like using the open-ending questions, like why do you think that is, or what do you think ate that?
Presenting them with a question rather than just going with facts and letting them kind of come up with their own individual definitions instead of putting the scientific definition out in front of them first.
Let's share out a bit. What you got?
We talked about the importance of pre-planning your questions so that you are being intentional about how you ask them and what ones you ask.
I think also promoting open discussion, not just between an instructor and a student, but with students and other students.
Peer-to-peer. Now, during this session, we're going to use the definition of question that researchers of questions use, and that's that any utterance that requires a response, that elicits a response, that's a question. So sometimes they have one of those curly things with a dot on the end of them, and sometimes they don't. It's still considered to be a question. So for example, what do you notice about what the animal is doing? Curly thing on the end. Describe what that animal is doing. No curly thing on the end, but it's the exact same thing. You're eliciting this exact same response. I'm going to pull out something here. I'm going to hold it up, and what I'd like you to do is please describe it to the person that you just turned and talked with. Go for it.
Shiny.
Outside, it's very rough, and very textures are totally different.
Yeah.
Like
There's a thicker kind of ridge on one side than
Right, and the other side's more thin.
With this next object, I'd like you to describe the object to the person next to you, and also compare it with the first object.
looks like there's a seam in the middle.
This one is more of one solid color, and the other one is multicolored.
Yeah.
Both were smooth on one side, and it looks like this has some rough sides as well.
Spots where, like, there are areas that are rough on it, and it does have holes. You can see through it. You can.
There are holes in it. It's sort of
You
branched.
can still see through it.
I'm going to bring out a third object. Guess what you're going to do? Describe the object and compare it to the both of those.
And it kind of, I mean, it looks like it has a section that broke off or something like that.
Some sort of right that we're missing a piece, where the other two are consistent pieces. We still have
Very, I mean, bicolored, so the tips seem worn and different.
Now that's something different because in the structure, because they lose that every year.
That's right. It's not integral to the success of the animal.
Although that aids in reproduction. Not sure what that piece of the bone was, but maybe that aided in reproduction too. It just reminds me of the cavity in my...
Don't you think Penny should have to wear it like a mask, though? Don't you think he should have to wear it like the dog and the Grinch that stole Let's do A, B, and C. Okay? So, what is that object? Okay. Which of these is from the body of an animal? Okay. What kind of animal is that one from? Okay. What kind of animal is that one from?
Elk.
Which of these is from a gastropod? Which of these is from a mammal? Okay. The reason we did this is actually to compare your responses, the types of questions that were asked, and compare the responses. So let's go back to the first questions I asked about describing the object and making comparisons, right? So how did you respond to those types of, what did you do? What happened?
We all talked at once.
Okay. The room, did you notice that? The room was, there's all this stuff. There's this cacophony of sound.
The realm of our responses was really broad. We talked about color, we talked about texture, we talked about shape, symmetry, we talked about composition, we hypothesized what it came from. It was huge, the realm top, almost subjects, you know.
Those sound like divergent topics.
Yeah, exactly.
So it led to divergent discussion.
When you asked to describe an object, there was more dialogue as opposed to what is, or just asking like a one word. You're looking for like a one word answer, essentially.
Okay.
There's no pressure to be wrong or right. You just describing. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the core response, it's kind of like, oh, maybe it's an elk. I'm not sure. I don't want to say it.
Anybody else have a similar response to Bubba's there?
Yeah.
Did anybody have the opposite response where they felt less secure during the initial ones? Those first questions that we asked, how did they make you feel?
I think we felt more empowered the first time because we could take it whatever direction we wanted. We could kind of focus in on what we thought was interesting or what we noticed about it.
I felt that it gave us a chance to listen and feed off what other people in our group were saying when they said, this is what I see, or they started describing it.
It made me look more closely at the object, because if my first thought was abalone, but then when I had to describe it, I had to look at it. I had to really look at the little parts, and my partner had already said a lot of the obvious things, so I found myself probably looking at it more closely than I would have if I hadn't been describing it.
And it's not just your experience here, but what you're doing is reinforcing what the research shows, is that broad questions tend to lead to divergent thinking. It tends to go in directions that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Some people feel a little insecure with it because they like to please the teacher and they don't know how to please the teacher when you ask a broad question. Narrow questions tend to be recall questions. They go for a specific response. Have you seen that pattern before? And it's guess what's in my head. It's a game so often played by people, and with the illusion that it's a discussion. I'm going to start a discussion. Here's what I want you to get to. You can't lead a discussion if you've got an agenda like that. It's not a real discussion. If you have something you really want people to get to, it's often best to tell them that thing rather than have them try to guess that that's what you're thinking. But if you want a discussion, you ask a broad question, then you get to ride that beast. You don't know where it's going to go, right? And that scares a lot of people. So can you help me? Let's brainstorm some narrow questions. Just go ahead and shout them out. What kind of tree is that?
What did you have for breakfast?
Which one's a gastropod? Which one's a gastropod?
What is salinity?
They're easy to come up with. Yeah. It's real easy to come up with them. That's what instructors do a lot, too. They come up with them. Okay, go ahead and call it some broad questions.
Why is diversity important?
What do you want me to say?
What's your favorite part of the whole week so far?
How does this make you feel?
Well, this is interesting. In our observations that we have made of hikes, or we actually chronicled questions and categorized them a little bit, what we noticed was the broad questions that got asked tended to do with feelings, but not with science. But there are lots of field instructors for whom broad questions is not something that they tend to think about in terms of science. And that's no different from classroom teachers. Very similar thing with classroom teachers, too. There is a belief that has been expressed oftentimes that narrow questions are easier for kids. I use narrow questions because it's just easier. They like it. It feels comfortable. I want to challenge that idea because it tends to be easy for the students who are good at recalling specific bits of information. And that is not all of us. Every group of kids has at least one of those kids. Anyway, what we often do in educational settings is reward those kids who are good at the specific facts. And then the kids who are really good at big idea thinking, divergent thinking, higher level thinking, creative thinking, in science class, they don't get rewarded. Now, in terms of exploration, again, narrow questions tend to not encourage exploration. Broad questions tend to encourage exploration. Broad questions tend to encourage discussion. Narrow questions don't tend to encourage discussion. And it's not like narrow questions are bad. They just have a different purpose. So the key is to think about what is my goal with what I'm about to say. Do I want a discussion to happen? Ask a broad question. Do I want to know if they know what gravity is? Ask a specific question. Ask a narrow question. Excuse me. When might narrow questions be appropriate?
In an emergency situation.
Can you breathe?
To check for understanding.
During data collection?
I want my students to feel success, right? And so a lot of times I have a questioning progression where I'll start with some really simple, kind of obvious, narrow questions and get students successful on that and then kind of build to those broader questions where we're a little bit more difficult, require a little bit more struggle.
So did you realize what we just did there? We asked a broad question about narrow questions. Is that too much? And we asked the broad question about narrow questions. We had 6 different responses that came out there. Go ahead and check out this research if you could. Number of questions asked by teachers daily was about 300 to 400 questions. The average percentage of narrow questions asked was 75%. And the number of narrow questions in an average 30-minute lesson was 70.
We went out and looked at a bunch of programs around California. So there was 7 broad questions that were asked during the 6-hour hike, but most of them were kind of fake broad questions where they really did have an answer to them that the instructor was trying to get at. Some other kind of general observations. Most questions asked by observed field instructors were narrow questions, focused questions again. When broad questions did occur, when they, the really good broad questions that we saw, they were mostly about feelings. They weren't about science. And that's great. It's great to ask broad questions about feelings, but we're just noticing that they weren't being asked about science, and that was interesting to us.
Part of the reason we think that this is the case has to do with control. And control is at the bottom of a lot of instructor issues with changing the way they teach. If I ask a question and it's broad, it could go places that I don't understand. Kids can bring up things that I don't know the answer to. I'm not comfortable with that topic. I don't want them to go there. I've heard people say before, seek out the edges of students' understanding. But what we're trying to say in this session and through BEETLES too is seek out the edges of your own understanding. It's so cool when you can be an authentic co-investigator, totally, and the kids feel that. If they feel that you're always having discussions and explorations about things that you know the answer to and you're trying to take them to that, they feel that too. And what I've heard staff say, including outdoor science school field instructors, is the kids feel manipulated. They feel like they're manipulating the kids. It's by being led by the nose. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's not just about the questions you ask, the type of questions you ask, but it's also how you perceive your role as an instructor. So we're going to do some skits. This skit you're about to observe, a huge amount of what's said in here is verbatim from a hike that I observed.
We'll hack you down the trail. Look! There's Scout! Oh my God!
Look, it's Scat! Guess what kind of animal made that Scat?
Why is the scat hairy?
That's a great question. It has hair in it because it's a carnivore scat.
Oh, did it come from a wolf?
Well, there used to be wolves here a long time ago, but not anymore. This is an animal kind of like wolves that lives around here. Can you think of it? It starts with the letter C.
Coyote?
Maybe coyote, maybe domestic dog.
But dog doesn't start with the letter C.
It could be a mountain lion.
That's not a mountain lion scat. At least, I don't think it is.
Cat starts with C.
It's not a cat scat. It's too big for a cat. Think about how big cats are.
How would you describe the interaction between the instructor and the students in this skit? Comedic. Exhausting. I have to say that having observed the actual interaction, it wasn't quite as entertaining.
Disconnected.
Disconnected, say more. What do you mean?
I think the naturalist was engaged with maybe the one student who was really into what was going on, and the other students were just wandering and losing what the focus was on at that moment. It was too much talking and less describe what this is to you. What do you see?
kind of felt like the instructor had to impress her students with how much she knew.
Never seen that before, have you?
No, never.
It was very corrective. Like, everything you say, I'm going to correct you. That's wrong. No, this is right. Even though she didn't really know the answer.
And she never asked them to think. I don't think the whole time she asked them to think once. She just kept telling them the answers. And if they asked a question, she shut them down. She just gave them the answer and moved on to whatever she wanted to say. She didn't engage with them at all.
Well, how do you think that this instructor perceived their role?
I think she maybe saw this scat as an opportunity to talk about the transfer of energy. And she's just like, yeah, this is totally Fuji. I'm going to teach it right now.
She saw herself as the expert.
The student should just listen to her. It seemed like more on a stage than discussion.
On a stage, is that what you said?
Yeah, on a stage.
I'm the expert. I know it all. So you just stand there and you listen to me.
Cover all sorts of little divergent points in content.
I got my scat spiel.
Oh my God!
Check it out. Look at the scat Keith just found.
It's humongous.
What did you notice about it?
Well, it's kind of hairy.
What do you mean by it being hairy?
I mean, it looks like it has hairs in it.
Those of you who are up close, can you tell us more about whether those look like hairs?
It's like made of hair.
Can you describe the hairs for us? Like the color, the length?
They look sort of gray.
And twisted. It's almost like a rope, scat rope.
Looks like a little bone in there, too.
Yeah.
Let's let a few others get up close, too. Can you move back so they all can get in there and see?
I see the bones too.
So what do you guys think? Anyone might have an explanation for why there's hairs in that scat?
It ate a hairy animal.
It's a carnivore.
Yeah, animals are meat.
You are what you eat.
How would you describe the interaction between the instructor and students in this scenario?
It was about the journey, not the destination, essentially, sort of.
And you felt like the teacher was on the journey with them.
Right.
Not just telling them to take it.
Right.
How do you think this instructor saw their role as an instructor?
More to guide the students through the scientific process of, starting with observations and then narrowing it down based on their observations rather than just word vomit of information.
Word vomit.
Yeah, you talked earlier about the instructor's fear of losing control. And there were some moments within this skit where the instructor was fully in control by some direct language that they used.
Well, I think it's cool because I think it gives credibility to the students. The instructor was in a position where he was allowing them to answer things and sort of validating their answers. And I think it makes kids feel good to know that what they say is important and it is leading them closer to the answer. Jenny?
Although there was, he kept the discussion focused, there was still the allowance for, well, I'm going to let this kid make some jokes.
Oh my God! Hey everybody! It starts with an S and ends with a T. It comes out of you and it comes out of me. I know what you're thinking and you can call it that, but let's be scientific and call it scat. Check it out, guys. We've got a humongous awesome scat here to explore. Now let me give you the scoop on poop because I'm a bit of a scatologist. And the first question I have for you is that the scat of a cat or the doo-doo of a dog?
That's too big to be from a cat. My cat's poop is a lot smaller.
I actually meant whether it comes from the dog family or the cat family. Your cat is a distant cousin of a bigger cats that might live around here, and the beautiful bobcat and the magnificent mountain lion.
Is it mountain lion scat?
No, it's not. Scat from the cat family is segmented and has blunt ends like a Tootsie Roll. Dog scat has pointier ends. I remember it because dogs have pointier heads, and the scat has pointy ends. Cats have more blunt heads, and their scat has blunt ends.
My pug has a blunt head.
Well, most dogs anyway. So what kind of dog do you think we might have that lives around here?
A wolf?
Not a wolf. There used to be wolves around here a long time ago, but not anymore. Sorry, try again. I found another piece of scat over here. I wonder if this could be coyote scat. This one's harder to tell, though.
Ew.
Yep, that sure tastes like coyote scat. Okay, now I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. That wasn't coyote scat I just bit into. It was an energy bar. I made it into a scat shape.
How would you describe the interaction between the students and the instructor?
He was
I thought that you saw his role as the entertainer.
Did this instructor encourage exploration?
He said the word a couple times.
I think in his mind he thought he was, but it was obvious that he wasn't.
So sage on the stage is a common term used to describe when somebody sees their role as delivering information. I deliver accurate information. And then there's the guide on the side. And then you brought this up today, the entertainer. Does anyone defend the entertainer?
I don't think there's any harm in a scat rap, you know, if it's just kind of kept to that. So we do a scat rap and then blend in with, you know, a lot of the dialogue that happened in that second skit.
Scat rap is cool.
You know.
I am happy that I have a few entertainers on my staff. We have one person on staff who is always there ready with some kind of game or something fun. And they're not learning, but they are having fun.
Reformed entertainers can make great educators. Entertainers who know how to turn it on and turn it off can be great. And then people who aren't entertainers at all can make phenomenal educators as well too. And that's one of the things we want to highlight here. Some of the best instructors are the quiet instructors who are in there asking questions of kids and letting the kids be on the stage rather than themselves.
I think it's sort of knowing how to use your force for good.
Exactly.
So it's
100%.
using it, your personality maybe, or as an entertainer, as a gateway of getting you to the guide on the side and recognizing that it is moderation, but how do I take the focus away from me and making it more on the kids?
So the idea of being present with your kids, being yourself with your kids, being who you are, and having that be part of your package, I think that's very valid. But there's lots of different ways of doing that, and the entertainer role can get in your way.
Planning questions can be really important for a few reasons. As instructors and teachers, we tend to fall back on how we were taught when we get stressed out. And so many of us have been taught in a really didactic, lecture-based way that when we get out in front of students and something doesn't go right, it's like right away that's what we want to fall back on. And if we just have some really good broad questions, you know, on a 3x5 card or something in our pocket and we can pull that out in those stressful situations, we're more likely to kind of ask broad questions to encourage exploration and discussion instead of falling back on that lecture and that content like dump so many of us fall back on. And obviously improv is really important too, being able to ask questions on the fly. Following student curiosity is going to be really important too, but just having a few broad questions in your back pocket, literally in your back pocket, is so crucial to really encouraging that discussion and that exploration.